I now give the floor to Her Excellency Karin Kneissl, Federal Minister for Europe, Integration and Foreign Affairs of Austria.
مرحبا.
Good morning. I am here in my capacity as the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Austria. And I would like to say greetings to Your Excellency, the President, Mr. Vice President, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates. Being the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Austria, I am able to address you in Arabic. Why do I do that? This is one of the 6 official languages of the United Nations. I studied Arabic in the UN in Vienna. It is a beautiful language. It is part of the Arab civilization, the ancient civilization. I also studied in Lebanon during the years of war. I learned how people continue with their lives despite all odds and difficulties. This is the secret of life. There are men and women from Baghdad to Damascus. They continue with their life. All respect to those people. All of us are the offspring of Adam. The offspring of Adam means, in another word, humanity. In this whole, we have a voice, and we have to use this voice to express the voice of those outside this whole, those who are living in conflicts and wars, especially in the Middle East. Allow me to quote the German writer Bertolt Brecht. He said, and I quote, "There are some in darkness, there are others in light. We see only those in the light. We do not see in the darkness." I will shift now to French, and I would like to thank the interpreters for their patience and indulgence.
Monsieur le Président.
President, I will now continue in another United Nations language, that is to say French. I have just quoted the German writer Bertolt Brecht, who spoke about those who are to be found in the darkness and those in light. And we only see those who are in light. Unfortunately, we diplomats are often unable to ensure that the voices of those who are in the darkness and misery are heard. Our diplomatic practices all too often give priority to fine statements over genuine action. I would even venture to say that we accept a dialogue of the deaf when we limit ourselves to a ritual of simply reading out prepared statements. This way of thinking shows that we have lost contact with reality. We no longer understand the meaning of a genuine exchange of views. When we speak, are we really discussing anything? Are we even able still to look each other in the eyes? Albert Cohen, an expert on the League of Nations, the organization that came before the United Nations, wrote in Geneva his masterpiece entitled Belle du Seigneur, whose protagonist is called Solal. He works as Assistant Secretary General of the organization. Ultimately, this man loses his job as ASG, in the League of Nations, because he forgets his diplomatic restraint when faced with the persecution of German Jews in the 1930s. My dear colleagues, have you ever had the feeling of losing composure when faced with injustice and indifference? The multilateralism that we are celebrating here is a sophisticated form of diplomacy. We have a panoply of instruments, such as our conventions, statements, committees, but where is the effectiveness of this multilateralism? President, my dear colleagues, at this juncture, I would like to welcome the speech given by President Emmanuel Macron before this Assembly, in which he raised some very interesting points on multilateralism and the rule of law. For the President of France, those two terms are synonymous. This multilateralism often fades into a flurry of meetings that some wealthy diplomats have made into a comfortable, subtle, endless game full of litanies and mantras. Unfortunately, we settle for these hackneyed arguments when we talk about Syria and Yemen. We get carried away with words such as reconstruction, stabilization, constitution, and so on. Meanwhile, populations, children, are just trying to survive. They need food, drinking water, a few hours of electricity, and a basic level of security. That is why, beyond these lofty statements, Austria wants to contribute, as other countries are already doing, to financing the mine clearance system in Syria. And as concerns the greatest tragedy of our time, and here I'm referring to Yemen, Austria is ready to increase its humanitarian commitment. But let us come back from the work on the field towards the beautiful hall in which we are gathered today. Multilateralism, based on a diplomatic approach with standards, demands us to condemn, in upholding universal values, the use of chemical weapons in Syria and elsewhere. We must also firmly reject biological weapons. In the same vein, there is no reason not to categorically ban the production and use of nuclear explosives and weapons. President, ladies and gentlemen, disarmament, non-proliferation, and arms control are crucial for global security. The 50th anniversary of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, reminds us of the key role of the rule of law. Notwithstanding some success, the NPT has suffered from inadequate implementation. But what does law mean? It means binding rules, which have to be executed. Like other international treaties, disarmament treaties are not a moral matter, but they're a legal issue. We are convinced that making genuine progress on the path to nuclear disarmament, in that context, the ratification of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, the CTBT, is of paramount importance. My country, Austria, is proud to have been chosen as the headquarters of the organization responsible for implementing this treaty. We're proud of that. I will now continue in Spanish. President, the destructive power of nuclear weapons has made it imperative for the legal prohibition of war to be strictly observed in practice. We congratulate Latin America for having created the first international zone free of nuclear weapons. We all know that, according to the United Nations Charter, there is no such thing as a fair war. In 1945, the international community pledged to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. Unfortunately, the United Nations has not been successful in upholding that promise. President, in addition, most states in Latin America have recognized, as Austria has done, the mandatory jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. This is an essential condition to uphold credible international law. In the same vein, Austria is a steadfast supporter of the International Criminal Court. This year, we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of the adoption of the Rome Statute. The establishment of a permanent international court to prosecute the most heinous crimes was a landmark event. We now welcome the activation of the jurisdiction of the court over the crime of aggression from the 17th of July this year. This is an important step forward in fighting against impunity. However, we regret the fact that the ICC's jurisdiction has been undermined by various agreements that constitute obstacles to people being surrendered to the court.
I may now switch to English. Dear colleagues, excellencies, and thank you to the interpreters. The main purpose of the International Court of Justice is to foster trust in the international legal system. Our Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, spoke at length about the broken trust we do face. The most recent example of the importance of trust and reliability in international relations concerns the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, which is politically but not legally binding. The JCPOA, negotiated in Vienna, is the result of effective multilateral action. It contains a set of political commitments and, what is very important, an independent verification system with the International Atomic Energy Agency. This agreement demonstrates the importance of pacta sunt servanda, a famous Latin phrase many of us have heard during our studies. Agreements have to be preserved. This is a precondition for mutual trust and confidence building in the international arena. Now, preserving the nuclear deal with Iran is a matter of respecting international agreements and a matter of international security in the end. If one country, which originally committed to the JCPOA, can walk away from it without other partners to the agreement having violated it, mutual trust is weakened. Reliability is key for peaceful solutions of conflicts. This is especially true for long-term conflicts, such as the one on the Korean Peninsula, where concrete and substantive measures should follow the first encouraging steps, and our sincere respects for all those involved in this process. President, Excellencies, multilateralism has failed also several million women worldwide, and so have individual states. Gender equality is about more than legal provisions. It is about daily practice in our countries and societies. That is why the fight against discrimination and improving the situation of girls and women worldwide has been a long-standing concern of Austrian foreign and development policy. Our focus lies on the women, peace and security agenda, the political and economic empowerment of women, as well as the fight against gender-based violence with a particular focus on combating female genital mutilation. More than 200 million women and girls worldwide are victims of female genital mutilation, or as we call it in short, FGM. Together, we must stand up against this humiliation, this breach of human rights and appalling violation of physical integrity of girls and women. In 2018, the Austrian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has earmarked more than €1 million to help victims of FGM through surgical restoration, because it can be restored. Here in New York, I had very constructive talks with the United Nations Population Fund and UNICEF for the purpose of joining forces for the basic rights and physical integrity of girls and women. We aim that not only through conferences and seminars, this is one thing you can do, but most important, through practical surgical help, there where help truly becomes operative. Women and children are among the vulnerable victims of human trafficking. Illegal migration illustrates that on a daily basis. This tragedy we know on a north-south and east-west context. Mr. President, Vienna has found its specific identity within the United Nations family, in particular in the fight against organized crime, corruption, and terrorism. Next year, Vienna will celebrate the 40th anniversary of the establishment of the United Nations office in Vienna. I am part of that generation of Austrians who grew up with the proud awareness of living in the city of the United Nations. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, with this speech, I have tried to depart a little bit from the usual United Nations discourse. I refrain from addressing every single issue dealt with by the United Nations system. However, I cannot stop before endorsing Secretary General Guterres' foremost concern: climate change. The global energy mix is still dominated by fossil fuels, such as coal. Scientists are working on finding new forms of energy, in particular for transportation. Will we see electric mobility or other types of engines on the increase? Innovation, market forces, and political action will decide. But it is the Middle East where major oil reserves are located. The states of the Middle East have been shaped by oil business in the aftermath of World War I. Now, in autumn 2018, we commemorate the end of that big war, which ended 100 years ago. Let me remind you that with the breakdown of the Ottoman Empire, the new map of the Middle East was based on pipelines. And then the borders were drawn. The recent wars imposed on the Middle East were also fought in the name of oil. Now Syria is a victim of the instability created by all these wars. A week ago, a ceasefire was brokered in northern Syria for the city of Idlib. 5 national armies find themselves in a sort of standoff amongst millions of civilians and thousands of terrorists, some of them EU nationals, which we call foreign fighters. The burning issue now is how to remove from this military situation to a diplomatic transition. Time has come for courageous steps to launch such a process. We believe there is a momentum for a new dynamic. and we wish to encourage decision takers from Washington to Moscow, from Tehran to Jerusalem, and from Ankara to Damascus to seize this very momentum. There is a historic chance, and there is no alternative than to go to the negotiation table. As it goes in Hebrew, ein brara. There is no alternative. Thank you.
I thank the Federal Minister for Europe, Integration and Foreign Affairs of Austria. I now give the floor to His Excellency Sheikh Khalid bin Ahmed Al Khalifa, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Bahrain.